Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to have you. We'll have the privilege of listening to very interesting panelists discuss on the topic of addressing inequality and informality towards inclusive growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. To discuss this topic, we have the privilege, like I said, to welcome hand-picked panelists who are going to be giving us in-depth understanding of what the topic is all about. But then I would like to introduce the moderator of the day, who will take the responsibility for introducing today's panelists. So, ladies and gentlemen, moderation will be done by Dr. Dennis Foretia, the co-chair of the Dennis and Lenora Foretia Foundation and executive chairman of the Nkafu Policy Institute. Nkafu Policy Institute, you all must know, it's a leading think tank in Cameroon and in Africa. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Dennis Foretia, who will be introducing our panelists of today's webinar. So, Dr. Foretia, you have the floor. You're welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Ayungba, for that kind introduction, and welcome to all of us on this very important conversation today. Thank you for joining us as we look at the issue of informality, the issue of inequality, and what strategies we need to be implementing or are currently implementing towards inclusive growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. I am very excited, with this stellar panelists that we have today. You would see our team sharing their brief introductions on the chat, so you would have the brief introductions for them to see their bios. But just to give you all a synopsis of who we have joining us today for this conversation, we have Madam Edith Kawala. Madam Edith Kawala is the Chief Executive Officer of Strategies, which is a consulting firm based in Cameroon. She is also a political leader and currently the national president of the Cameroon People's Party, based in Cameroon, and one of the first female presidential candidates in Cameroon. Madam Kawala, we are really honored to have you join us today. Our next speaker is Dr. Rose Gugi. Dr. Rose Gugi is the executive director of the Kenya Institute for Policy Research and Analysis, KIPRA, based in Nairobi, Kenya. She has decades of experience in economic policy at the national as well as international level. And I am honored to serve with her on the board of directors of Southern Voice, where she is my board chair. So really wonderful having you, Madam Board Chair, with us today. We are also honored to have today Professor Gerda van Niekerk, who is an associate professor at University of Limpopo in South Africa. She has deep experience in financial law and regulation, financial stability, inclusion and transformation, as well as business law in Sub-Saharan Africa. We are very excited to have her and look forward to her contributions. Our final speaker is Mr. Junien Bigoge, who is an economist by training and currently is at the Independent Research and Capacity Building Center for Development, which is based in Lomé, Togo. We are very honored to have you, sir. Also, during this conversation, we are lucky to have two other eminent experts joining us. We'll have Ms. Eugenia Kayitesi, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, IPAR, based in Rwanda, as well as Professor Emmanuel Ongo, who is the Director of the Centre d'études et de recherche en économie et gestion, CEREC, based in Yaoundé, where they will give us some comments on their topic. Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, welcome. I'm very excited about this. Now, let me go straight to the conversation. And I'll start with you, Madam Kawala. One can really not talk about, the economy and job creation in Sub-Saharan Africa without really talking about the informal sector. Now, from your vantage point, what are the primary drivers of informality as we see it today on the continent? And how do factors such as poverty, such as limited access to financial of formal employment, as well as the regulatory barriers that we have on the continent. How do these really contribute to the informal sector as we see it today?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much, Capital Policy Institute, especially for putting Central Africa on the map. We are often absent from both the continental and the global discussion. So I would say the drivers of informality on our continent are three things: governance, governance, and governance. Because we must realize that the informality of our economies is not an accident or something that happened to us along the way. It is the direct product of how we have governed our economy. And unfortunately, for many decades, I would say probably up to maybe about 10, 20 years ago, and some countries have still not left that mindset. We had a mindset that the informal economy was bad. And we built economic strategies around everything except the informal economy. And one of the reasons for this was that we were getting economic advice from the World Bank and the IMF, people who had no clue what informal economies were. Now, the informal economy is an asset. It is an asset to Sub-Saharan Africa. It's a hotbed of entrepreneurship, of innovation, and it provides basic fundamental services to the economy and to the community. Look at motorbike riders. If they were not there, half of Africa would not have transportation. Look at our market women in our fresh food markets, who are a fundamental chain, a part of the chain in delivering food and therefore food security to Africa. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is we need to change our mindsets. We need to center the informal economy. There are so many things causing informality: education, but mostly how our governments are running our economies. There are too many barriers to formality and not enough advantages to formality, especially for micro and nano businesses. I'm going to talk about the market women because I've done a lot of work with market women here in Douala, Cameroon. The Sandaga market in Douala, Cameroon supplies fresh food to 7 cities in Cameroon and 3 countries in Central Africa. So look at the importance of that economic platform. And by working with the market women, we did things like registration, helping them to see the benefits of being registered, upskilling, training, investment in their informal businesses, and on a very small scale, with about 500 women, in a 2-year period, we saw increase in income. We saw the market women becoming a force to be able to discuss with local government, and we saw increase in employment. So it is just to say that informality is structural in Africa. It is a governance problem. And if we want to get out of it, we must completely transform our mindsets, center the informal economy, which is where all of our entrepreneurship energy, as well as our women and our youth, are the majority of that informal economy. And we must begin to look at government interventions that are multifaceted, multi-sectoral, to lift the 85 to 90% of workers in Sub-Saharan Africa who are working in the informal sector.
Your top three reasons for the drivers of informality, as I noted very much at your intro, is governance, governance, governance. So it's a huge issue, and there are too many barriers that we see, as you've highlighted. And as we all really know, informal workers often face very precarious, working conditions. They lack very lots of the social protections that we all talk about, limited access, as Madam Kawala mentioned, to financial services. I want to bring you in, Junien. Can you discuss some of the challenges as well as the vulnerabilities experienced by individuals as they engage as they're in the informal sector? What is your experience in this area?
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie vraiment l'intervenante précédente qui a souligné vraiment la nécessité de pouvoir changer le mindset que l'on a sur le secteur informel, la nécessité de le percevoir vraiment comme un secteur à fort potentiel de croissance. Alors, pour parler des vulnérabilités dans le secteur informel, il faut dire que la question est très intéressante parce que ça permet de toucher un point essentiel, c'est qu'il est difficile de parler du secteur informel comme un corps homogène. Le secteur informel est marqué par une diversité des acteurs qui interviennent. Donc, si on doit parler des défis et des vulnérabilités auxquels ces acteurs-là sont confrontés, il faut vraiment les prendre chacun dans sa spécificité. Et pour cela, je vous propose de diviser le secteur informel en 3 petites catégories. Vous savez, dans le secteur informel, de manière générale, on a les petits acteurs de l'informel. Ces petits acteurs de l'informel sont dans l'informel essentiellement pour des raisons de survie. C'est des acteurs qui ont le plus souvent un faible niveau d'éducation, qui développent des petites activités génératrices de revenus, organisées le plus souvent autour des activités commerciales ou autour des petites activités de réparation. Donc, l'enjeu pour ces acteurs-là, c'est vraiment d'avoir des ressources qui vont leur permettre de satisfaire leurs besoins essentiels et les besoins de leur famille. Et donc, au niveau de ces acteurs-là, les défis principaux, c'est déjà les défis de la stabilité du revenu. Parce que comme c'est des petites activités commerciales, la recette du premier jour n'est pas la recette du deuxième jour, n'est pas la recette du troisième jour. Il y a un caractère fluctuant des recettes, ce qui limite en tout cas la capacité à réaliser des actions économiques telles que la consommation, l'épargne, l'investissement, etc. Il faut aussi noter que l'absence de protection sociale et l'absence de mécanismes redistributifs tels que les assurances chômage font en sorte effectivement que ces individus-là sont exposés à de nombreux chocs, parmi lesquels les chocs sur les questions de santé. Il suffit qu'un enfant tombe malade pour que les ressources qui ont été générées par l'activité puissent partir totalement à l'eau. Il suffit que la personne elle-même tombe malade pour que les ressources générées partent totalement à l'eau. Donc voilà un peu les vulnérabilités auxquelles ces acteurs-là, ces petits acteurs de l'informel sont confrontés. On note également de nombreuses autres vulnérabilités, telles que le travail des enfants, les vulnérabilités liées justement à la pénibilité du travail, parce que ce n'est pas un secteur qui est contrôlé, ce n'est pas un secteur qui est toujours réglementé, donc il y a des cas importants de pénibilité du travail. Mais il est important de dire qu'au niveau de ces acteurs-là, le défi relatif à la formalisation reste très, très, très peu perceptible. À côté de ces acteurs-là, on a une petite catégorie qui s'appelle une catégorie intermédiaire qui s'appelle la catégorie des gazelles. Dans cette catégorie-là, on retrouve un autre type d'acteurs, c'est essentiellement des étudiants qui sont confrontés à des barrières à l'entrée sur le marché du travail à cause de problèmes tels que l'inadéquation entre les systèmes d'emploi, entre les systèmes de formation et les emplois disponibles, et puis plein d'autres facteurs qui, eux, s'insèrent dans le secteur informel pour pouvoir également faire leurs activités génératrices de revenus. Alors, au niveau des défis, ces étudiants, c'est essentiellement des défis liés à l'accès au crédit. Eux, ils ont besoin de beaucoup plus de crédit pour pouvoir justement faire décoller leur activité et faire basculer leur activité du secteur informel vers le secteur formel. Et enfin, on a une dernière catégorie, c'est les gros acteurs de l'informel. C'est des individus qui sont dans le secteur informel par choix. Ça, c'est très important. Ils sont dans le secteur informel par choix parce qu'ils sont dans le secteur informel du fait qu'ils ne veulent pas subir le coût lié justement à la formalisation. Et donc, les défis au niveau de ces acteurs-là, c'est essentiellement des défis liés à la politique fiscale. Donc, quel est le niveau de taxation qui est calibré en direction de ces acteurs de l'informel-là? Quelles sont les possibilités qui leur sont offertes dans le secteur formel en matière d'accès au crédit pour pouvoir développer leur activité? Et quelles sont également les possibilités dont ils peuvent bénéficier en matière de commande publique? En matière de commande publique, comment ils peuvent mieux bénéficier des marchés publics, etc. Donc, voilà un peu les principaux défis auxquels les acteurs de l'informel sont confrontés.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bioge, for that summary, the 3 different categories and the challenges. Again, you also highlight, the challenges to accessing finance, the challenges to formalization, so which really is a good link to Prof. Gerda. you know, we know that, as our two previous speakers have noted, there is really the challenge faced by SMEs in accessing formal financial services, banking, credit, insurance, and the like. Now, Prof. Nikek, from your experiences, what strategies or interventions have been effective somewhat in promoting financial inclusion for individuals who are engaged in the informal sector, informal activities?
Thank you very much, Dr. Furitia. You all know before the end of apartheid in 1994, economically weaker households in South Africa were excluded from having access to financial services, which were mainly available to the white community. Financial services at that time focused on middle and upper income customers, and lower income customers had to rely on informal bodies like burial societies and stokvels. Now, financial inclusion has come a long way in South Africa from 61% in 2004 to 93% in 2018, although there's still room for improvement, because many of these 93% people who are regarded as financially included only use their bank accounts as mailboxes. So the money will come in and come out. So, or it will be inactive accounts. So if you work that out, it's actually only 48% of South Africans who continually use their bank accounts and are truly properly banked. So if you look at the informal sector, that is an area where there's still a lot of financial exclusion. So one of the solutions might be digital financial inclusion. So the definition, what I suppose all of you know what it is, but just to confirm it, it is broadly used to say digital financial services are used to advance financial inclusion, and that will involve the deployment of digital means to reach financially excluded and underserved people. So some of the problems that are experienced, so I'm now referring to South Africa because that is where I do my research, but much of that can be applied in the rest of Africa. Many rural villages and townships in South Africa have weak availability of telecommunications and infrastructure. So the first solution would be a drive from government for sufficient infrastructure to support digital transformation. And secondly, the retail payments infrastructure should be expanded and modernized by digitizing informal trade. Because people get money in rural areas, and then they withdraw all their money in cash, and then they do the business in cash. So the infrastructure should be changed so that people will be able to pay digitally at the point where the sale takes place. And by doing that, people in informal business will be able to open bank accounts and use that more often. So that's the second recommendation. And thirdly, there's the possibility of agent banking, because informal vendors like spaza shops, retail, other retail, where they do little business, all those ones, hair salons that you get on streets, they could be made an agent for the bank. So then you will get a branchless banking. It will not be so expensive as building expensive branches, because that's a problem in South Africa. The rural areas they don't have enough branches. So if you can implement something like agent banking, where you go to these informal vendors and you train them to be an agent, and then you can make a point of sale terminal by everyone.
Yes.
And so that is my third recommendation, in short.
No, really appreciate that. And you've talked about like the infrastructure, the digital financial services or so, and what the role of government. And we know government, as Madam Kawala said at the beginning, governance. So there is the aspect of ensuring that there is a good architecture, for supporting, the informal sector and not treating it as though it's bad, so to speak. But, it brings me to Dr. Gugi, Dr. Rose. You're advising governments all the time. It's your day in, day out, as we say. Yeah, and we know for sure that, as has been described already, mentioned already, the government policies and regulation undoubtedly influence really, the size, the dynamics of the informal sector as we know it. Now, what is your experience, or what are your experiences regarding some of the approaches that have been adopted by governments in the region, to address, improve the informality? What examples do you have, or what suggestions would you make actually for governments?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dennis, and I appreciate being in this forum because it's discussing a very critical sector that is booming, that is contributing a lot in terms of employment, that is actually taking a lot of the energy of the youth in the region, but at the same time not getting the attention that is required for us to actually see the potential, exploit the potential of this sector. And I'll start by just giving examples for Kenya. First of all, you know that the aspect of informal sector was first actually realized by, I think, the World Bank in the early 70s in Kenya. And a lot has happened since then, although we have not managed actually to see some transition to formality, but a lot of activities started from very early after independence, when the government was setting up various institutions to provide, for example, financing, as well as workspaces or worksheds where entrepreneurs would actually exercise their innovation and grow. So I would say that responding to what Madam Wala was bringing in, the issue of governance is very true. Because when you look at some countries where we have a huge micro and small enterprises, which tend to be informal, you'll find that there is a setup of, say, for example, a ministry in government, which means that you are mainstreaming it into or bringing them into the table, so that anytime the discussions are happening on the informal or micro and small enterprises, they're actually on the table of the government agenda. And in Kenya, what we have now, for example, is the State Department, which is looking specifically on micro and small enterprises. We also set up Micro and Small Enterprises Authority, again, geared towards looking at the micro and small enterprises. And this in itself helps actually to ensure that the agenda of the informals, which are mainly micro enterprises, is not forgotten by the government. So at that onset of governance, that is exactly what we are trying to do. And in addition to that is realizing that micro and small enterprises tend to have financial issues, and therefore trying to look for channels for helping them to access affordable credit. For example, having credit guarantee schemes, and recently introducing what we call the Financial Inclusion Fund, or what we call the Hustler Fund, which is meant actually to give them access to affordable and very little, or the little that you would want to facilitate your business. Even if it is $1, $2, you can actually go in, get a funding, and then you're able to sort out yourself within a very short time. In addition, is also ensuring that they're not blacklisted, because sometimes the credit bureaus tended to actually blacklist these small savers, small borrowers. So when the new government came in, it came up with reforms whereby credit rating bureaus were sort of reformed to stop being punitive, but rather to facilitate them to gain some credit that would help them to access credit. And of course, in the country, we also have quite a number of affirmative funds that are related mainly to youth. Others are there for the women. And all these funds help to bring in the youth who are actually going to the informal sector to get some funding from the government. In addition, is to say that marketing is also a key issue for the informal sector. And one way of even bringing them closer and formalizing them is actually by giving them a platform. Like in Kenya, we have given them a platform of accessing government procurement opportunities. And in registering, for you to access, you have actually to be registered, which means that you have to formalize your business. But at the same time, you also have to be tax compliant. And if the two actually are meant to define informality, then you know that with the two, then you have a ready market, which is the government, and they are given an opportunity of about 30% of all government procurement is given opportunity to micro and small enterprises, both also for women and also for the youth enterprises. And of course, finally, is to say that in organizing themselves, if you go to our transport sector, you'll find that the government has really insisted on them forming what we call the SACCOs, or the savings and credit cooperatives. And this in themselves help them to actually self-regulate themselves, check among themselves on how they can actually improve on the services that they are providing to everyone. So I would look at it in a nutshell that there are things that can be done actually. Whether you can manage to do formalization fully, maybe not yet, but it helps you to look for channels that any of the informal sector players can actually find themselves improving and growing their business. Thank you.
Oh no, thanks so much, Dr. Rose, for that. Really, quite a number of government interventions and policies that have been implemented, the Kenyan experience, so to speak. Now, I want to switch a little bit and talk on, for us to shift gears to and talk on inequality, the way inequality is we are seeing inequality on the continent. And as you all well know, Sustainable Development Goal number 10, calls for reduced inequality, not only within countries, but also really among countries. Madam Kawala, let me come to you, to get your thoughts on what trends do you see today across the continent with regards to inequality, especially when you look at economic inequality. Are we making progress? Where do we stand?
Unfortunately, we are not making significant enough progress in any country. While we are going to see economic growth in Africa, we had that huge dip at the time of COVID, and the continent is slowly growing out of that. We'll probably see about 3.4% growth this year, and up to about 3.8% next year. But this is largely insufficient to actually impact poverty. And that the truth, which nobody talks about too much anymore, because it has been such a difficult goal to attain, is that in Africa, for most of our countries, we need double-digit growth to be able to significantly impact poverty and inequality. And when we talk about inequality in Africa, I'm going to talk about structural inequality. It is in the area of before you get to economic production. So as you prepare for economic production, there is all the investment that you make in human beings. So this means access to basic services such as water, electricity, nutritious food, healthcare, and education, so that you actually have human capital which is ready for production. Now in Africa, access to those basic services is hugely unequal and can be like 2 to 3 times, sometimes even 5 times difference, depending on, most importantly, location. So access to these services is very different from the cities to the rural areas. Second factor is, of course, gender. Access to these services is very different, whether you're a girl or a boy. And then you have other elements of the intersection which play, such as disability, such as being an ethnic minority, or a hugely important factor today in Africa. If you're a child who lives in a conflict area, then you really drastically reduce your access to those fundamental factors which will contribute to whether you can become productive and generate income for yourself or not. The second layer of the structural inequality is, of course, in the infrastructure for production. So this is about market distortions. It's about economic infrastructure, such as roads, such as railway, any kind of transportation, such as it is about elements such as internet connectivity, what that actually allow you to have the infrastructure, to have the elements which make you productive and competitive, because we also know that today we are in a global market, whether we like it or not. Not only must we be able to produce, but we must be able to do so competitively. And the third layer of where that impacts inequality is our fiscal management, is how governments tax, and it is also how they spend in the way of social transfers, of subsidies, and so on, which can help to alleviate or balance poverty. Now, we see that in all 3 of those areas, we are not doing well as Africa. We are not giving the access to the basic services pre-production to our population. We are about 600 million Africans out of a population of 1.3 billion who do not have access to electricity. You know, our numbers in terms of education, we are the continent with the highest number of children who are out of school, and 80 to 90% of those who are in school are learning poor, so they're not getting the basic education. So our inequality, and those are my lights going on and off, by the way. By the way, that's why the lighting is changing. So talk about access to basic services. So really, in terms of inequality, we see again that we come back to governance, and we come back to needing a multi-sectoral approach. You know, I loved listening to Rose Ngugi earlier to hear what the Kenyan government is doing. I worked for Kenya, by the way, in 2014 in the advocacy to get government spending to go to these small and micro enterprises, notably those owned by women. But if we really want to address inequality, we have to make sure that the companies that are getting that kind of access to government procurement are also being upskilled to continuously increase their ability to produce, that those companies are also in programs that will enable them to give social security to their employees, to give health insurance to their employees, so that we are reducing poverty for the people who are working for them. And then we have to look at the tax structure that government has in place for those businesses. So the trend is not good in inequality, but the good news is that we know what the different factors of structural inequality are. We know that multi-sectoral approaches and strategies can address these structural factors in a way that can make a difference. And we've seen this happen in African countries like Mauritius, like Botswana, and we have good examples that we can build from.
No, thank you so much, Madam Kawala, for that. The issues regarding structural inequality, access to to services, the infrastructure deficit that we have on the continent for really basic services, and also what is fiscal management, government policies for fiscal management. And you did mention the gender equation to all of this. And Prof. Garrett, I want to bring you in here, to look at some of the gender dimensions. When you look at gender disparities, how does it really intersect with economic inequality the way we see on the continent? And how does it affect our efforts towards inclusion? Financial inclusion being really the main type of inclusion when we think about this. So could you talk a little bit about what steps can be taken, or have you seen being taken to address some of these disparities, especially with regards to gender?
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, so it was found that as is implicated in the question, that gender disparities intersect with economic inequality. And it happens in many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa where females are, for instance, not allowed to be in school and to be involved in major economic activities. And the research found that those females then also had less ownership of land and assets. Now, in South Africa, I don't think we have that kind of inequality. At the university where I work, we have many female students, definitely more or less the same, male and female. So that is not happening in South Africa. But what I read about some countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, that is the gender inequalities are a very big problem. Because what happens, the inequality encourages dependency of females on males. It kills the entrepreneurship. It leads to poor quality of life. And women are denied their meaningful contributions to the household. So the steps that have to be taken, as I see from my side, like I say, not only looking at other places, not from South Africa, is that men should be enlightened towards socio-economic transformation. It's very important that educational opportunities should be given equally to girls and boys. So in my previous point that I made was that I referred to things that government can do, and things where financial sector regulation can play a part. But with this kind of inequalities, we have to go back to the society, to the family. That is where I see the problem. To remove these barriers. And that's where we have to start. If I read about places in Africa where girls don't have the same chance to go to school than boys, I mean, that breaks my heart. I can't even think that is possible. And it is. So yeah,
it is unfortunately, the reality that we experience a lot. So that's not, that is there are many communities, societies, where this inequality, and the gender perspective, it's really entrenched. And I think how we really dig ourselves out of that hole is a very important one. And I really like the issue of going back to family. Most of the time, I remember, I think it's the American elections or so, talking about Hillary Clinton, where even some of the biases that folks had, where people said, "Oh, I want Hillary Clinton to be my daughter, but not my wife." you know.
yes. So
So,
what we have in South Africa, we still have a lot of gender-based violence that
yes.
we have.
Mhm,
And if I see once the president spoke about it, and he said, he spoke as a man, and he said he gave a message to men. And I
mhm,
think that is where politicians can come in.
mhm.
They can speak and say, we as men, that's not how we are. And he spoke about that it's actually not the African tradition. That
Yes.
that's a story that's told. It's not actually how it should be.
Yeah.
And
No,
in
I
that sense, you can bring the message down.
Yes, no, I think it's important, but we it's all these gender stereotypes and biases that we have, but we need to ensure that young girls and women have equal opportunity, equal access. All those barriers are taken away. It brings me, Dr. Google. Let me come to you about this to get your thoughts, but I want to also and throw in another element here, and Dr. Google, to look at the element of of climate change. And what are your thoughts on the potential implications of climate change and environmental degradation on economic inequality, and the challenges that we have with regards to to financial inclusion? How is the climate and the issues that we are seeing with climate change, how is that affecting what we currently have regarding economic inequality?
Okay, thank you very much. It's good you brought in the aspect of climate change. And I come from a country where when the Horn of Africa is affected, we actually get affected by a drought situation. And we have seen the droughts actually becoming more frequent and more severe. And the impact that they usually have is actually increasing. It's increasing because immediately we finish up with the drought situation, then we get into flooding, and it's like everything, it's like everything gets disrupted, whether it is business, whether it's transportation, whether it's the way of life that gets disrupted. And we have seen, for example, in our arid areas, anytime we get into drought situation, the community's way of life gets disrupted. They rely on livestock. And the recent drought for 2021 up to 2022, we saw a significant number of livestock actually getting or dead. And it means that families then have to start all over again. And starting all over again means that you need to have had some resources that can help you to get back to where we were. And the fact that these climate shocks come to or hit into areas where they have very little as far as financial resources are concerned means that it takes them a while again to come up or to restock. And by the time they are restocking again, the drought again hits. So it's become really a vicious circle of trying to get out of a situation with the drought, but still getting back to poverty. So one is that there are communities that have high level of poverty. Secondly, they have very low in terms of cushioning factor. There are areas that you don't have a lot of crop insurance or livestock insurance, and therefore there is very little that they can rely on when the shocks actually come in. In addition, you'll find also that there's very little as far as financing the damages is concerned. So, for example, in Kenya, when the 2021, the prolonged drought hit, we declared it a national disaster. So you declare it a national disaster, you expect that there will be funding coming from international community, partners and the like. But when destruction happens, a lot of that is expected to come from the government pocket. And what do we see? We see that there is rarely is there adequate funding to actually restore the livelihood of these communities. So you therefore find them getting back into the poverty situation, and therefore inequality persists. They try to come out of it. Their children are not going to school, and they are not able also to access health facilities. So their human capital is actually affected or disrupted, building that human capital. And recently, we have actually done a study to actually check how is labor productivity across the various regions in the country. And what we have seen is that in the arid areas, for sure, the level of productivity, labor productivity is very low. Whether you're talking about it in agriculture, in livestock, or even in the small industries that are there, because again, the diversity as far as economic activity is concerned is very, very small. So that aspect of labor productivity being very low, again, means that you are not actually employing your resources fully to exploit the opportunities that are there. In addition, we have also seen that in these communities, you'll also find a significant amount of children employment, which means that at the very early stage, you're not able actually to go to school. And then when you get to a certain age, even from say 50 and the like, then you find also that there is no incentive for the adults actually to look for jobs because jobs are not there, which means you have this high level of dependency to a very small, minute level of population, which is actually making things happen for communities where drought hits very hard, and therefore aspects of inequality seem to be, it's a vicious circle that we have not yet managed to break through. Yeah, thank you.
No, it's really a vicious cycle, and it's very difficult when you have when you put a national disaster and at the same time there is no mechanism to provide relief, and that vicious cycle just continues. Please, for our team here, please send your questions in. We'll get to your questions in a minute after a lightning round. But I want to come to you, Mr. Biyoge, to talk a little bit. We mentioned just a few minutes ago regarding how our societies, how do we envision a society, our societies where we can address some of these deeply entrenched patriarchal norms that we have that often relegate women to a secondary status. So what as you know, women disproportionately shoulder the burden of care work, unpaid care work in our communities. How do we start addressing these systemic inequalities? So what are your thoughts in a few minutes?
C'est d'abord une question de vision et une question d'ambition. Quand on regarde un peu le monde tel qu'il est actuellement polarisé, et précisément le continent africain, l'Afrique est aujourd'hui confrontée à un phénomène de polycrise. Vous prenez la crise les effets négatifs liés à la pandémie de Covid-19, vous prenez les effets liés au conflit russo-ukrainien, vous prenez les effets liés à la crise sécuritaire, notamment dans les pays du Sahel, mais au-delà des pays du Sahel, aussi au niveau des pays côtiers, des pays d'Afrique centrale, des pays de l'Afrique australe. Vous prenez les effets liées à la crise climatique dont nous ne faisons que parler. Tout ceci fait en sorte que les défis du développement sont de plus en plus corsés, sont de plus en plus risqués. Or, dans le même temps, quand on regarde la grande majorité des pays africains, aujourd'hui, vous regardez la structure de la population dans les pays africains, au moins dans chaque pays africain, la moitié de la population est constituée par les femmes. Donc, c'est tout simplement impossible aujourd'hui de penser le développement tout en excluant la moitié de la population. C'est tout simplement suicidaire, on va dire. Ça revient un peu à aller faire un combat de boxe et à monter sur le ring avec un bras cassé et un pied cassé. Je ne pense pas qu'on puisse gagner ce combat-là. Et donc, je pense que déjà, dans un premier temps, il faut promouvoir la scolarisation. C'est un élément très important. Il faut promouvoir la scolarisation parce que les stéréotypes et les inégalités, à mon humble avis, prennent beaucoup leur source dans l'ignorance. Donc, il faut promouvoir la scolarisation. Alors, quand on regarde un peu les statistiques, on voit qu'au niveau africain, il y a beaucoup d'efforts qui ont été faits en termes de parité, d'accès à la scolarisation et d'achèvement de la scolarisation pour le niveau primaire, mais il y a encore beaucoup d'efforts qui restent à faire en ce qui concerne le niveau secondaire et en ce qui concerne le niveau supérieur, en termes d'achèvement de la scolarisation. C'est vraiment très, très important qu'on puisse faire en sorte que les filles, notamment les garçons aussi, mais que les filles notamment puissent rester plus longtemps à l'école à travers un ensemble de dispositifs, des dispositifs tels que des bourses d'excellence qui pourront être soutenus à la fois par les gouvernements et par le secteur privé, d'où la nécessité aussi de pouvoir faire en sorte que le secteur privé puisse mieux s'impliquer dans les questions relatives à l'éducation. Il faut également penser à des dispositifs tels que la gratuité des frais d'inscription, l'orientation des filles en plus grande quantité vers les filières scientifiques et techniques. C'est à travers l'éducation qu'on arrive à éluder ou bien à éradiquer un ensemble de préjugés. Et je précise l'éducation des filles, mais l'éducation des garçons aussi, parce que les garçons aussi doivent être éduqués. Et de l'autre côté, je pense aussi beaucoup à la question de la formation professionnelle, qui n'est pas en reste, qui est une question particulièrement importante. Les femmes doivent être formées dans des métiers qui sont traditionnellement accessibles aux hommes et qui présentent des fortes opportunités d'emploi. Je pense notamment à des secteurs clés en Afrique tels que le secteur de BTP. Je ne connais pas beaucoup de femmes en Afrique qui roulent par exemple des bulldozers, qui roulent des catapillars. Ça existe, mais pas encore suffisamment, pendant que c'est des opportunités de placement en emploi. Donc, il faudrait justement qu'à travers l'éducation, à travers la formation, on encourage beaucoup plus aussi les jeunes filles à s'orienter vers ces métiers porteurs-là, de manière à ce que les filles comme les garçons puissent être tous les deux contributeurs du développement du continent. Voilà. Et je voulais ajouter, si vous me permettez, je voudrais ajouter juste un dernier point.
Just 1 minute, please.
Yes. Je voulais ajouter juste sur un dernier point la question de la technologie. C'est très, très important parce que la participation des femmes aussi à certains secteurs traditionnellement réservés aux hommes est liée aussi à la capacité à y utiliser amplement des technologies qui vont réduire considérablement la pénibilité du travail pour les femmes et pour les hommes, de manière à ce que tous les deux puissent contribuer au développement. Merci.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think we are going to, before we go to questions from the audience and to get comments from our panelists, I want to have a quick, what would be a quick lightning round, maybe 1 or 2 minutes max from each of our panelists, to just look at, the strategies for inclusive growth. We've talked about all of, the challenges with informality, the inequalities that we have, in a few comments regarding what strategies as a continent we need to be employing towards inclusive growth. And Prof. Gugi, Dr. Gugi, I'll come with you first, for, quick 2 minutes or so. What are some of your key recommendations? I know Madame Kawala has talked about governance, but I'm sure she's going to come back to that. But let me pass it on to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll take just a short time and just give 3 elements. One is the aspect of value chains, the integration of activities that really are in the marginalized, what we call marginalized communities, into the value chain. For example, those in arid areas, they do a lot of livestock, integrating it into the daily and also the level value chain actually would help them to see some value in the activities that they are doing. Secondly, I want to talk about the aspect of indigenous knowledge. You'll find that many times that we forget about that indigenous knowledge, and there's some communities actually that you can tap into that. For example, we have the beadwork. Beadwork is very, very crucial for some of the communities that we call marginalized, and yet we can tap into it and commercialize it. Unfortunately, they use the beadwork actually to do their cultural activities rather than making it actually an activity that can be commercialized. And then thirdly, and the last one, in agricultural sector, I think what America did to open up the rural areas with the rural access roads is what we actually need also to do. Have rural access roads, and farmers, small farmers, will be able to get to the market, they'll be able to get the inputs, they'll be able actually to transact and be able to get into high value commodities because they can actually access the market. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being very succinct there. I'll bring you in, Madam Kawala, on some of your key strategies, the highlights.
Thank you. I think we've been giving some strategies all along. So going back to my governance point, you're right. One is that inclusive growth is about a whole economy strategy, and that can only be led by governments. I love the value chains that Dr. Ngugi was just talking about, but government has to decide what the priority value chains are for the economy, which value chains should be supported, including in creating value for our indigenous knowledge. So I would just say multi-sectoral, look at the structural aspects of inequality. So look at pre-production, what kind of human capital we are building, and get services out to the people, even to the rural areas. Number two, look at production and look at all of the economic infrastructure we need to be truly productive and competitive. And then number three is looking at that fiscal, the fiscal policies, the tax policies. We could have a whole other seminar about taking the money from corruption. A country like mine is estimated to lose 30% of its revenue due to corruption. Imagine what kind of investment you could make in inclusive growth if you had that money available. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Madam Kawala, for those. Corruption is a big deal. We haven't even touched it. So let me bring you, Mr. Biyoge, quickly, and then I'll get Prof. Gerda.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Denis. Alors, très rapidement, je pense que j'ai trois éléments par rapport à la thématique sur laquelle nous avons discuté ce matin, qui est celle du secteur informel. Je disais que le secteur informel résulte aussi du fait que beaucoup d'actifs sont confrontés à des barrières à l'entrée sur le marché du travail. C'est parce qu'ils n'arrivent pas à accéder au marché du travail formel qu'ils font dans le secteur informel pour pouvoir avoir une certaine capacité de survie. Et donc, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est limiter en réalité la capacité des actifs à être confrontés aux barrières à l'entrée sur le marché du travail. Comment il faut le faire? Il faut déjà que la question de l'inadéquation entre les systèmes de formation et les emplois disponibles soit réglée. Et ça passe par un dialogue permanent et constant entre le secteur privé et les autorités gouvernementales. Il faudrait qu'on ait plus de synergie et de symbiose entre le secteur privé et les autorités gouvernementales dans la conception même des offres de formation, de manière à ce qu'on puisse mettre sur le marché du travail les personnes dont les entreprises ont besoin. Tant qu'on n'aura pas cette adéquation-là, on se retrouvera toujours sur le marché du travail avec des gens dont les entreprises n'ont pas besoin et qui vont grossir les rangs du secteur informel pour pouvoir se créer des opportunités elles-mêmes. Maintenant, ça c'est en amont du secteur informel. En aval de l'informel, pour celles qui sont déjà dans l'informel, il faut essayer justement de mieux soutenir les petits acteurs de l'informel avec des dispositifs de protection sociale non contributifs qui vont leur permettre justement de mieux sécuriser leurs revenus et puis de pouvoir faire croître leurs revenus jusqu'à un certain niveau critique qui va leur permettre par la suite de basculer progressivement vers le secteur formel. Et le basculement vers le secteur formel se fait aussi par la mise en place de régimes fiscaux adaptés Il faut que dans les États, on puisse mettre en place des régimes fiscaux qui puissent permettre de pouvoir exonérer pendant un certain temps les acteurs qui viennent du secteur informel de manière à leur laisser la marge nécessaire pour pouvoir se stabiliser, pour pouvoir travailler un temps et ensuite commencer à payer des impôts. Et enfin, je vais finir par là. Il faudrait vraiment que l'on puisse capitaliser dans le secteur informel sur la catégorie intermédiaire dont j'ai parlé, que j'appelais les gazelles, qui sont une catégorie marquée par les jeunes, avec des forts niveaux d'éducation, avec des projets particulièrement performants, mais qui sont dans le secteur informel par manque de moyens. Il faudrait qu'on pense aussi à apporter du capital à ces acteurs-là. Et enfin, je voudrais dire que j'adhère vraiment à la logique qui consiste à changer la vision que l'on a du secteur informel. Il ne faut pas que l'on perçoive le secteur informel comme un secteur vraiment qui fait de la concurrence déloyale au secteur formel, mais que le secteur informel soit perçu comme un secteur à forte potentialité de croissance pour les États africains et sur lequel on peut capitaliser pour le développement. Merci.
Thank you so much, Mr. Junian, for that. Prof. Gerda, briefly, in 2 minutes or less, your thoughts, and I'll bring in Professor Emmanuel Ongo to give some thoughts.
As Madam Wala mentioned, we need double-digit growth in South Africa to solve the problem of poverty. Now, the annual growth rate in South Africa during 2023 was 0.6%. So you can see South Africa is also one of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa where, despite the potential and natural resources we have, we battle to foster economic growth. So there are many things to say about how you can reach that. The one thing that I want to say is that there is a nexus between financial stability and economic growth, and that has been proved by research. An unstable financial system prevents capital flows into the system, and then investors do not feel confident that they will receive a good return on the investment. So it is very important that central banks of countries should bring in policy implications, should bring in the correct policies that will ensure a financially stable economy. For lack of time, I will not go into this, but there are many studies done that shows that bank stability and all those kind of things actually promotes economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think we have Professor Emmanuel Ongo. Professor Ongo, can you, you've been part of this conversation, which has been very enlightening. So, what are your comments, regarding, the whole subject of inequality, of informality, and strategies for inclusive growth? We can keep it to 3 minutes or less, please.
Et je salue tous les panélistes cet après-midi. Je préfère m'exprimer en français car c'est ma langue, on peut dire, de naissance.
Oui, professeur, c'est bon.
OK, merci beaucoup. Donc, j'ai principalement suivi avec beaucoup d'attention ce que les autres ont dit et c'est très intéressant, c'est pertinent. Moi, j'ai 4 principales idées. La première, c'est que concernant l'informalité, il y a un problème de manque de confiance de la société en général ou des citoyens par rapport justement au fait que parfois ceux-ci payent les impôts mais ne voient pas la contribution de ces impôts à la transformation de l'environnement social. Donc, il y a ce manque de confiance qui existe aujourd'hui et que nous devons sûrement travailler au-delà de ce que tous les autres ont dit, à savoir la gouvernance, à savoir les taxes et tout le reste. Mais je pense que c'est un problème crucial qu'il faut travailler aujourd'hui, car les données sur la confiance économique publiées par le World Economic Forum montrent qu'en général, est en deçà de la moyenne. Regarde, ma préoccupation première est de donner les chances à tout le monde de pouvoir contribuer à la croissance, de pouvoir contribuer à la création de richesses. En d'autres termes, il s'agit davantage de réduire les inégalités d'opportunités. Je prends un cas simple, c'est que lorsque nous voyons comment l'État aujourd'hui fonctionne, l'État fait beaucoup d'efforts pour inclure les minorités. Mais ces efforts ne sont pas encore remarquables. La décentralisation, par exemple, est venu pour essayer de combler le gap entre la politique nationale des gouvernants et le bas peuple. Donc, il faut réduire le gap entre ces deux entités. Donc, il faudrait que l'État puisse travailler dans le développement local de manière à réduire donc les inégalités d'opportunités. Pour ce qui est de la croissance inclusive, j'aurais principalement 2 idées. Ça fera 4 idées. La première idée, c'est que naturellement, nous devons, pour une croissance inclusive forte, il faut travailler sur l'emploi des jeunes et l'emploi des femmes. Il faut automatiquement permettre à ce que la jeunesse qui est aujourd'hui en Afrique, la population la plus importante, que cette jeunesse puisse soit s'auto-employer, soit être employée par les mécanismes gouvernementaux qui sont mis là-dessus. Pour cela, il faut des compétences, il faut des formations, il faut des politiques mises par les gouvernements. Et autre idée principale pour la croissance inclusive, naturellement, on l'a dit, hein, je pense qu'il faut un système social inclusif. Parce que normalement, pour les populations, cela montre qu'il faut justement que les populations aient la capacité de pouvoir mieux se soigner pour mieux contribuer à la croissance en général et à la croissance inclusive en particulier. Donc, ces 4 idées, au-delà de ce qui a été si bien dit par les panélistes, me donnent l'envie de dire que c'est un débat qui peut encore être amélioré dans d'autres circonstances. Et je saisis l'occasion de remercier le président, le docteur Denis Foretia, pour l'opportunité qui m'a été donnée aujourd'hui de placer ces petits mots d'analyse personnelle. Merci.
Prof, merci beaucoup, Prof. Thank you so much for those four points. We really appreciate it. The lack of confidence, as you mentioned, citizens' lack of confidence in the system governance, youth and women job creation strategies. I think those are extremely important points that you've put. I see we have a lot of questions, and I would for the panelists or so, if we'll take 5 to 10 minutes to go through some of these questions before we conclude, if you don't mind. I see a lot of questions here, and I would let me quickly go to one. How can we effectively guarantee, from Anthony, how can we effectively guarantee equality and inclusion of women in a largely dominant and resistant patriarchal context? That's one question that we have for our panelists. From Muriel, thank you very much. Insightful discussion. Would like to look at regional. I would like to ask if regional integration efforts in Africa can contribute to overcoming some of the barriers to inclusive economic growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. If yes, how? Another one from Vanessa, Mr. Junian mentioned categories of informal actors, and I would like to know in which category we can place women, given that the data shows that women form the majority of the workplace in the informal sector. That's one there. A question from Maria. I would love to hear some of your views on where you see the biggest challenges and opportunities of an accelerated regional economic integration. I think similar to what I think Muriel asked, in the informal sector in Central Africa region, marked by a huge diversity of countries. I'm reading this, that way team members, you all would pick 1 or 2 questions to conclude on. Bon après-midi, ma première question, dans près de 95% d'offres, vous avez cette fameuse exigence qui est l'expérience professionnelle. Comment remédier à cette question qui vient toujours plomber l'accès des filles à un recrutement? That is from Nicole Fortabon. So, team panelists, you all have these questions or so. I'll go quickly, on a lightning round to just address a few of them as you see fit, just 1 or 2 minutes each. Madam Kawala, do you want to start?
Yes, let me take the questions on regional integration. So regional integration can help to address some of these questions. notably questions of that second level of inequality, the economic infrastructure. So, of course, countries can collaborate to have better transportation systems in place, increase even access to electricity and so on through cross-border collaboration. However, even integration requires a functional state. You can't integrate with somebody else if you're not able to manage your own business. And this is the problem we see in the African regional organizations and in at the level of the AU. We still have too many dysfunctional individual African states. So that question of governance continues to remain at the center, even though regional trade and especially cross-border trade, where there's a lot of economy across our borders, the customs and so on, making it faster, cheaper, can go a long ways to helping those people. But we need governments that function to build that kind of partnership.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Kawala, for that. I would bring you in, Dr. Gugi, for your comments to address some of the questions that we have.
Yeah, just a small comment to follow up with what Madam Wala has brought up, and that is aspects to do with regional integration. Of course, with the ACFTA now almost taking off, we can see opportunities opening up, but of importance is the aspect of keeping to the standards. I think in most cases, what we find is that informal sector aspects of standardization is what makes it difficult for them to be competitive in the market. And whether at the regional level or at international level, standardization of their products remains very core in actually penetrating the market. In addition to that is also bringing in technology. For example, e-commerce, and of course, like Madam Wala is saying, without the infrastructure, without the internet facilitating, you may be on 5G, another one is in 1G, then it would make it very difficult actually to deal with the e-commerce. But e-commerce is here, and the integration of the region makes it or facilitates the informal sector actually to formalize and actually take advantage of the opportunities in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose. Prof. Gerda, comments from the questions that we have. Any areas that you want to, angles you want to go to?
Thank you, Doctor. There was one question, I can't find it now to answer the person on his name, on his or her name, about the fact that informal traders often are uneducated. How can they learn to use digital financial services? Now, again, I must bring it back to South Africa. So one of the things we should do here, we've got a new financial regulation system where the Financial Sector Conduct Authority has got the job to financially educate people. So that is something that we really, in the literature and in our dealings with financial sector regulation, we have to stand on that point and keep on pressing on it, that more financial education should take place. Because otherwise, the informal vendors who did not, that somehow they didn't go to school, so, you know, that they don't have any, or they were in school long ago, so they don't even know how to work a smartphone. So for that, we need financial regulators to come in to bring in programs to educate people. Otherwise, we won't reach, especially the marginalized.
No, thank you so much. This conversation is so interesting. We planned for 75 minutes, but we are totally gone above. I'll bring you Mr. Biyoge. What are your thoughts on some of the questions that were raised?
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Denis. Il y a une question que j'ai vue qui portait sur la question de l'expérience professionnelle. Comment faire en sorte de lever la question de la barrière à l'entrée relative à l'expérience professionnelle? Justement, dans mon développement, j'avais parlé de la nécessité de mieux rapprocher les entreprises des systèmes de formation, mieux faire dialoguer le secteur public et le secteur privé sur les questions d'éducation. C'est particulièrement important. Par exemple, sur le marché du travail aujourd'hui dans nos pays africains, il n'est pas rare de trouver des individus qui ont un niveau Master 2 et qui n'ont jamais fait de stage. Jamais fait de stage. Entre la première année et la cinquième année, ils n'ont jamais fait de stage. Ils ne savent pas comment ça se passe dans une entreprise, ils ne savent pas écrire un mail, ils ne savent pas utiliser Excel, ils ne savent pas utiliser Outlook. Donc, c'est quand même difficile quand on arrive en Master 2 avec un niveau d'éducation aussi important de ne pas avoir certaines, en anglais on appelle ça soft skills, je pense, certaines compétences qui puissent permettre de faciliter l'insertion sur le marché du travail. Donc, le partenariat entre le secteur public et le secteur privé dans le calibrage des offres de formation va permettre, par exemple, de faire en sorte que les étudiants puissent être plus familiers avec le monde de l'entreprise, plus côtoyer le monde de l'entreprise plus tôt. Dans certains pays, on fait des stages en entreprise en classe de troisième. On fait des stages en entreprise en classe de troisième. Pourquoi ça ne se ferait pas chez nous? Donc, il faudrait vraiment qu'on renforce cette capacité justement à mieux s'intégrer dans le secteur privé, mieux s'intégrer dans l'entreprise pour avoir les bonnes compétences qui vont nous permettre de pouvoir avoir toutes nos chances sur le marché du travail. Il y avait une autre question qui a été posée sur la question de la fluidification du marché du travail. Comment fluidifier le marché du travail? Et là, je pense que c'est un défi qui est très important. C'est un défi qui est très large. Déjà, il faudrait que nos pays se dotent de systèmes d'information sur le marché du travail qui fonctionnent correctement pour que justement dans cet esprit de dialogue entre le secteur public et le secteur privé, on puisse savoir quels sont les besoins des entreprises. Il faut qu'on produise de la main-d'œuvre qui satisfasse les besoins des entreprises. Il ne faut pas qu'on forme des gens juste pour les former. Et donc, ça renvoie également à la question de l'orientation. Comment les jeunes sont orientés dans nos pays. Beaucoup de jeunes, après le bac, c'est après le bac qu'ils se posent la question de savoir qu'est-ce que je vais étudier à l'université. Ils ne se posent pas la question bien avant pour chercher à savoir quels sont les secteurs prioritaires qui sont définis par l'État. Et ça aussi, c'est le travail des États. Il faudrait que les États puissent donner l'information à tout le monde en disant, nous, sur les 5 prochaines années, voilà les secteurs qui sont des secteurs prioritaires pour nous. Sur les 15 prochaines années, voilà les secteurs qui sont des secteurs prioritaires pour nous. Et les jeunes peuvent s'orienter dans ces secteurs-là pour éviter de se retrouver dans des situations de chômage.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We are largely past our time, and this has been really a very interesting, very informative conversation. Unfortunately, we'll have to bring it to a close. I want to really give a heartfelt thanks to a wonderful panelist, Madam Kawala. Thank you so much, for your time, Dr. Rose Gugi. Really appreciate this opportunity and your expertise, Prof. Gerda, Mr. Biyoge, Prof. Ongo. Thank you so much. And this has been really a wonderful exchange, and we hope to continue this exchange going forward. So please, thank you. Have a good rest of your day, afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. And for all our participants and those who remained engaged, we look forward to continuing this engagement in the subsequent weeks. Thank you, and you have a great rest of your day.